Good evening, everyone. My name is Amanda Thomas, and I would like to welcome you to Science on Tap Online. So glad you could all join us here this evening, and we are going to be talking about Back to the Night, the case for dark skies with Mary Coolidge, who is the Portland Audubon's Bird Safe campaign coordinator, and she also works to make urban environments more hospitable to wildlife and also help connect people with nature. So we're very excited to have her here this evening. I am personally interested in hearing what she has to say because we're thinking about putting some new lights outside and wanted to wait until hearing this talk before we did that. So again, welcome to all of you who are here for our talk this evening. I just want to do a quick intro to our event in general. Won't take too long, I promise. But Science on Tap is an event series that's been going in Portland, Oregon and Vancouver, Washington for around 7 years. And our goal is to make science accessible, fun, and meaningful for adults in particular, because we think it's important that adults think that science is important, or yeah, it's kind of recursive, but we think it's important that science is relevant to adults. And Mary is going to speak for about 45 minutes. You can put questions in the chat and in the comments. If you're watching on Zoom, you can put them in the chat. And if you're watching on Facebook, you can put them in the comments. And we have a team that will be sending those questions to me, and then I will come on screen again once Mary has finished her presentation, and will ask her those questions. So she has also agreed after the presentation is finished, around 8:15, she can come back online and chat with, or answer a couple more questions that are for the folks who are joining us on Zoom. So you can stick around and ask a couple more questions of her on text if you didn't get your question answered during the regular talk. Also, true to our name, we encourage you to have a beverage of your choice on the on tap portion of our name. I am having a smoothie this evening in my Science on Tap glass, so I encourage you to get a cold beverage of whatever your choice is and join us. And finally, we are trying to keep our events and podcasts free, because we want, like I said, we want everybody to learn about science and have free access to that. However, we do need money to be able to produce these events. So at the end, we will be putting up a link, or a couple of links on ways that you can support us. So any donation of any size, we are very grateful for. So thank you for that. Okay, I am going to stop talking and stop sharing my screen, and I am going to welcome our speaker this evening, Mary Coolidge. Let's learn some new things about what it looks like at night.
Hey, Amanda. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of the Science on Tap lineup to talk about the importance of dark skies. I'm really excited to be here presenting. Thank you also to all of the folks who've tuned in. I see a lot of folks from around the Portland metropolitan area, folks from further out in Oregon and Washington, and then I even saw Baltimore, Maryland pop up, and someone in Edmonton, Canada. So I really appreciate folks tuning in from locally and also farther away, Jackson, Georgia. So yes, as Amanda mentioned, I run the Bird Safe program for Portland Audubon, and I do advocacy and education and outreach about the hazards that birds face in the built environment. This program actually started as a community science project back in 2008, 2009, when I was running our community science program. And it was really such an interest area for me. And I realized that nobody else was looking at this in the region. And so I feel so incredibly grateful that I get to run a program that I feel so interested in and invested in. And tonight's topic is actually especially timely because fall migration is on and birds are already starting to move to their wintering grounds. Hate to say it, but that is happening. And we are actually soon to enter into a period of lights out alerts in which we'll be asking people to help reduce their night lighting to make sure that birds get to their destinations safely. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in my presentation. I also want to emphasize that the issue of dark sky preservation goes far beyond bird preservation. It really is a whole ecosystem issue. It's a human health issue. It's a livability issue. It's even a cultural heritage issue. So this is a really broad topic, and I hope that folks will find a place where they can enter into this conversation and this area of interest, and maybe you'll find a spark. So with that, I am going to share my screen. Okay, so yeah, people are tuned in from all around the metro region and the state and maybe even the country in some cases. But, you know, most people are probably tuning in from a place where they actually do experience some light pollution, maybe even a lot of light pollution. And I really wanted to start with this photograph, which is taken by Haroon Memedinovich and Gavin Heffernan of the Sky Glow Project, which is a really incredible project. And it is of downtown LA with the Milky Way superimposed over the top of it. And I think that this image does a really amazing job of capturing our imaginations and helping us think about there being a sky full of stars overhead every single night, if only we could draw back the curtain of light pollution, or in some cases in the Pacific Northwest, the curtain of cloud cover. But my goal tonight is really not to talk about returning the Milky Way to our cities. Rather, I hope to get folks thinking about the night as habitat, really important habitat for nocturnal species, and talk about some interesting science that's looking at specific case studies of light pollution's impact on wildlife species, and get people excited about the wonders and mysteries of the nocturnal environment and the creatures that are inhabiting it. And then, of course, to encourage people to actually go outside, look up at the sky, and fall in love with the night, fall in love with the night sky. And if I'm successful at any or all of those things, then I will provide you with ways that you all can engage in this work if you're interested in doing so. So I want to start by taking us back, really kind of way back. For 4.5 billion years, there was no artificial light on this planet, and biological systems evolved under regular cycles of bright days and dark nights. And that really set up all of our biological systems to be governed by this light-dark cycle. This is our external master clock, and it drives all of our circadian rhythms, which governs our sleep-wake cycles. It governs our hormonal cycles in wildlife, breeding and foraging and migration, and in plants, leaf drop and bud burst. So you name it, it is controlled by circadian rhythms, which are in turn controlled by regular light-dark cycles. And, you know, historically on this planet, people would have slept under a fully starry sky every single clear night of the year, provided they were outside. So just something to think about in terms of our deep human, historical, and cultural connection to the night sky. This is a NASA photo taken from space, obviously, and I think it does a really nice job of illustrating how much has changed just in the last 130 years or so since we've begun to light the night on a truly global scale. And now today, most humans actually live in urban and suburban areas, and we are functionally awash in light every night, all night long, from street lights and sports field lighting and parking lot lights and billboards and things like that. So those dark skies of yesteryear are really impaired and impacted by all of this electric light. This is something called the Bortle scale. It was invented in 2001 by a guy named John Bortle. And it is really a tool to help amateur astronomers evaluate the relative darkness and light pollution that's impacting their various observation sites. If you're in Oregon, you can locate yourselves on this scale. If you look on the far right-hand side, that's a class 1 excellent dark sky site, and you will find those in the Alvord Desert, on Steens Mountain, Hart Mountain, Summer Lake. If you move off to the right side of the spectrum, the Portland metro area is really over there, coming close to an inner city sky, so an 8 or a 9 on this scale. We've really lost a lot of our night skies. You have to go out to about Sauvie Island, 15 minutes or so out of town, to start to get back to some really beautiful skies. And here's how that scale roughly translates onto a map. This is an excerpt of a global light pollution map called the New World Atlas of Artificial Night Sky Brightness. It was developed in 2016 by a team of Italian astronomers and a NOAA researcher using infrared imaging. And it really illustrates the staggering picture of light pollution across the United States. In fact, they overlaid this data with population data and found that 99% of people live under light polluted skies, and 80% of people in the United States can't see the Milky Way from home. So pretty sobering, but I will say that we here in the West, so west of the Mississippi, are way better off than folks out east. And in fact, in southeastern Oregon, we have some of the most incredible world-class dark skies that we could possibly hope for. That if you look at the inset in the bottom left, there is a black area that I have roughly outlined with a red circle, and that is the Oregon portion of the Great Basin. That represents the largest intact area of dark skies in the lower 48. So we're incredibly lucky to have these kinds of skies that still exist right here in our state. When we look at a map of light pollution, this is how we get there. This is what's happening on the ground. So we have poorly designed light that's not shielded at all, that's too bright, that's on when we're not using it. And the more our national and our global populations are living in and growing up in urban environments and becoming habituated to this kind of lighting, the less we know what we're missing, the less we really have that old relationship with the night skies. And we are also simultaneously right now in the midst of a global conversion of high pressure sodium lighting to LED lighting. I imagine folks are pretty aware of this. LEDs are fantastic. They're incredibly energy efficient. They're really long lived and they're low maintenance. And that is all good. Unfortunately, early generation LEDs were all this blue rich white light, and we've gotten a little bit stuck on this kind of lighting. This kind of lighting is great during the day. Exposure to this kind of light at night impacts our circadian rhythms. This is more like daylight. This light emits a spike in the blue portion of the spectrum, and that light particularly scatters more readily in the atmosphere than longer wavelength light, which means that more of it is bouncing around up in our skies and ending up as light pollution. It also happens that that spike in emission is at the peak sensitivity for birds, mammals, amphibians, fish, and humans. So all vertebrates, basically. This is the kind of light we are most sensitive to. And what it does in vertebrates is it suppresses melatonin secretion, which means that you can't sleep. It is also tied to human health concerns, including a potential increased risk of cancer, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and it can also create a really dangerous glare and lead to permanent retinal damage. So this kind of light needs to be very managed, and it definitely should not be used outside at night. Let's talk about ecological light pollution. So night is critical habitat for nocturnal species. That's all bats, 90% of amphibians, 60% of mammals, 60% of mammals, right? We don't really think about that. And 60% of invertebrates are actually nocturnal, and they are highly adapted to nocturnality. Light pollution is actually degrading and fragmenting their habitat. Some of them can probably adapt and do, and others just really can't adapt. And that means that we are impacting this very carefully choreographed ecosystem when we are putting light outside at night. We're really jeopardizing that. There is a massively growing field of study that is looking at the impacts of light pollution. And there really isn't any good news about it. It's pretty much all bad news. The impacts to predator-prey relationships, the impacts to attraction and repulsion behaviors to lighting, the impacts to movement patterns, and in also the suppression of reproductive behaviors and reproductive success. So we're going to get into some of the interesting areas of study that folks are doing out there looking at impacts of light pollution on our wildlife. So bird migration. 70% of our North American bird populations migrate, and 80% of those migrants actually migrate at night. This includes diurnal birds, so birds that are generally active during the day. They are going to migrate at night in large part. They do that because the atmosphere is less turbulent, it's cooler at night, they can avoid their diurnal predators, they can preserve their daytime hours for foraging, and because they're also using star maps to guide them on their way. And long distance bird migration is truly one of the most magnificent and impressive feats in the animal kingdom. It's also incredibly metabolically taxing for birds. So anything that we do that impairs their ability to migrate successfully is going to have an impact on our bird populations. Generally speaking, birds will take off about 30 to 45 minutes after sunset. They will watch to see where the sun went down on the horizon, and they will follow things like the North Star, Orion, and the Big Dipper, and they'll fly all night long as conditions are good. That is until they come into areas where there's a lot of light pollution or sky glow. So this is probably one of the most famous or well-known locations of light pollution impact on migrating birds. This is the Tribute in Light in Lower Manhattan. It's a memorial to 2001. And this is illuminated one night a year, so on September 11th every year, starting in 2002. And there are researchers from New York City, Audubon, and Fordham University that have been collecting data on this site since 2008. What they have found is that when the tribute lights are on, birds tend to aggregate, and when the tribute lights are off, birds tend to disperse. So if you look at the photo that's on the left side of your screen, those are spires of light that actually project about 4 kilometers up into the sky. And all of those little white lines and dots are birds that are actually entrained in those spires of light. So they're just circling, they're stuck in those spires. And folks who are watching this can actually ask to have the spires turned off when a critical mass has built up in the spires, and then they're off for about 20 minutes and the birds continue on. So when we look at their data, they're using radar technology to track, they're using visual cues, but they're also using radar technology to track what's happening with the birds. And if you look in the upper right-hand portion of your screen, it's September 12th, that's 2:12 a.m. That radar data is showing cool colors, so blues and kind of pale greens, which indicates low density of birds. The tribute lights are off. There are about 500 birds within half a kilometer of the tribute in Lower Manhattan. Now, if you look just below that, it's 20 minutes later, it's 2:32 a.m. The tribute lights are on, and suddenly the radar is registering 15,700 birds within half a kilometer of the tribute in light. This is obviously a very extreme example, but it does do a really good job of clearly illustrating what's happening for birds when they're on a migratory pathway and they come into areas of light. This is a little bit more of a pedestrian or common kind of hazard that birds are going to face on their migratory pathways. So this is the Standard Insurance Building in Galveston, Texas. In spring of 2017, 398 birds that are on their northbound migration collided with that building. 395 of them died. 3 survived and were taken to rehab. And that building subsequently dimmed down its exterior lighting for the remainder of migration season to try to help birds get safely past. So this is a little bit more of a common phenomenon. And, you know, we ask ourselves, does it really matter? You know, who cares? But what we know is that up to 1 billion birds die every year as the result of hitting windows in North America alone. That's among the top 3 conservation issues that wild birds face after habitat destruction and feral cats. So it's a significant issue. And light pollution is related to that because it's drawing birds into our built environment where they then run into windows. There was also a Cornell study that came out just last year, December of 2019, that told us that up to 30% of our bird populations in North America have vanished since 1970. So this is a really serious issue. We have got to get a handle on the things that are impacting our bird populations. And thankfully, there are programs and tools out there that we can use. So researchers these days are using radar technology. They were using it in that tribute and light study. They use it in the tracking of migratory bird movements. And they produce alerts to let us know when we're going to have peak migration nights. Migration is really very protracted, more than 3 months long in spring, more than 3 months long in fall. But most birds are actually going to pass over during about a month period in both spring and fall. So in the Pacific Northwest, they're going to pass mid-April through mid-May in the spring and mid-September to mid-October in the fall. This is an example of a lights out alert from the Colorado State University Aero Eco Lab, where they were alerting us to a red and orange event over the state of Oregon. So 6.3 million birds flying over Oregon on the night of May 15th. This was just this past spring. 23,000 birds flying over Portland, 9,000 over Salem. So half the state is in a red alert, half the state is in an orange alert. And that gives us an opportunity to help get the word out and ask people to reduce their unnecessary overnight lighting so that we can really help get birds through our airspace as safely as possible. Okay, so let's move off of the topic of birds for a moment and talk about some other species that are using the night sky for orientation. So dung beetles have been found to use the Milky Way for orientation, which is really incredible, right? Dung beetles. They show up to a dung pile, which is a melee of competition. They roll themselves a ball of dung. They roll it off the dung pile. They climb up on top of it. They do a dung beetle dance. They take snapshots of the night sky, and then they roll their ball straight home. How do they do it? So researchers have done experiments to try to figure out what they're doing, and they have found that dung beetles are successful in rolling their balls straight home under fully starry skies and in planetariums when they're only shown the Milky Way. When they see cloudy skies or they see stars but no Milky Way, they can't do it. That tells researchers that they're actually using the Milky Way for orientation. Pretty impressive for a small insect. Harbor seals are also using the night sky. They do it a little bit differently. These are animals that are traveling long distances through water, in some cases without any terrestrial landmarks. And in swimming planetariums, they have been demonstrated to pick out a lodestar on the horizon and follow that star until it goes out of view behind the horizon. And they've already picked out another star that's in line with that first one, and they follow that one until it goes out of view. So again, really pretty advanced use of the night sky, more than most humans could do even with equipment, right? Sea turtle misorientation because of light pollution, probably another one of the most famous light pollution impacts that folks know about. So female sea turtles will navigate to their natal beach using the Earth's magnetic field. They climb up onto dry sand, they dig a body pit, then they dig a pit with their hind flippers to lay eggs. They lay about 100 eggs. They cover it back up and they swim off to sea, never to return to that nest. Those eggs incubate for about 60 days, and then the sea turtles will group dig out of their nest site. And they have one job when they dig out, and that is to get out to sea. And they are programmed to orient to the brightest horizon. Historically, before there was artificial light on the planet, that would have been over the ocean. But now that we've introduced a lot of electric light, that started to be up the beach toward the street. Less than 25% of sea turtle hatchlings are going to survive anyway, even if they can make it out to sea. So it's really critical that we curb this issue of light pollution impacting them. And the good news is that this has gotten a lot of attention. A lot of energy has been put into programs to make sure that sea turtles can actually do their jobs as young sea turtles. And Beachfront lighting on sea turtle beaches has in many cases been tuned to be very warm, very dim, and low to the ground so that we can preserve their biological processes. Back to birds. So short-eared owls and deer mice, research has been done looking at moonlight effects on prey behavior and on predator success. So in controlled settings, owl hunting effectiveness increases with available light, therefore requiring less time for them to actually capture prey. But mouse activity is simultaneously suppressed under full moon conditions as an anti-predator response. So during full moon periods, mice actually reduce their movement, they're foraging for shorter periods, they spend more time in dense habitat. So if we are putting lighting out on the landscape that mimics the full moon every single night of the year, we're functionally having a detriment to both of these species. Owls will have reduced success rates because mice are suppressing their activity, and mice are actually going to have a reduced ability to forage and to mate and to disperse. So we're really doing this to the detriment of both of those species. Barn owls are a species that maybe you know, maybe you don't know, really quite famously hunt in complete full darkness. They have asymmetrically placed ears, and they have that facial disc that helps them triangulate the location of their prey by sound, so they can hunt without any light at all. This is a study out of Finland that looked at 20 years of research on barn owls and their prey. And what they found was differential hunting success rates between white-breasted barn owls and red-breasted barn owls, because there are different morphs. Under full moon conditions, the white birds had more success at hunting because their prey tended to freeze for up to 9 seconds longer under that flash of white, making them easier to catch for bright white owls. Under a new moon, researchers couldn't find any difference in the success rates between red owls and white owls. So in putting out artificial light on the landscape, we're actually advantaging white owls. And you know, the red owls have chicks to feed too, right? We all have mouths to feed, so we're kind of putting them out of business. Bats, I know bats are a little bit controversial and often maligned, but bats are so cool. We have 15 species of bats in Oregon. They are nocturnal and crepuscular, which means that they are active at twilight. These are animals that are very well adapted to extremely low light conditions, and they're really beneficial insect eaters. Some bats can actually consume 50% of their body weight in insects each night. A lactating female can in fact consume 100% of her body weight in a single night. And some bat species are particularly attracted to lights to feed. California and Yuma myotis, 2 species on that list, are among them. And they've been documented feeding at the same lights night after night after night. So they get really habituated to using the buffet that may show up at a street light. Other kinds of bats actually avoid street lights or other lighting. It's absolutely repellent to them. Pipistrelles among them. So when we are modifying the nighttime environment, it is really to the advantage of some and to the detriment of others. Insects. So insect biodiversity and the relationship between impacts of light pollution has been a real focal point of research just in the last half a decade or decade. In 2017, there was a study that came out of Germany that indicated a 75% decline in insect biomass over the course of the past 27 years. So researchers and the media started to call this insect Armageddon. And there are obviously a number of causes, including insecticides and habitat destruction, and probably climate change playing a role as well. But it's becoming increasingly clear that light pollution is also playing a role on that. And, you know, again, we may say, who really cares? But insects are actually incredible pollinators. 80% of plants rely on insect pollination, and 60% of birds are insectivorous. So they they eat insects for a living. We also know that ecosystem services have been estimated to be worth about $57 billion annually. We need them for agriculture. We need them for pollination. And we need them to keep our ecosystems intact. The attraction of insects to light at night has more permanent and really widespread impacts on our ecosystems than we might initially think about. The photo on the right is a kind of hawk moth. It's a white-lined sphinx moth, also known as a hummingbird moth because of their flight patterns. These kinds of moths, hawk moths, are known as major pollinators of flowering plants, and they're also really long-distance flyers, so they are important long-distance pollinators. They're nocturnal and crepuscular, there's that word again, so they're active at dusk as well, and they are very sensitive to light and commonly attracted to it. So when moths are spending time at lights, they're not out pollinating plants, so they're not performing that ecosystem service. One interesting aside is that these guys have some of the longest tongues of all moths, and in fact, one of them in Madagascar has a 14-inch long tongue to pollinate a very deep-throated flower. I promised that we would talk a little bit about crows. I know that Kaylee Swift has been on to talk about crows in the past. Folks may know about the winter crow roost in downtown Portland if they're from the area. Urban winter crow roosts actually happen all over the country. There was one pretty well-known one in the Central Valley of California in the 1980s that was estimated to have 1 million birds in it. And researchers were studying that roost, and they found higher ambient light in roost trees that crows were using than in the trees that they weren't using. It's speculative, but they're probably using those lit trees because it helps them see the approach of nocturnal predators like barred owls and great horned owls, and therefore be able to warn each other about it. There's a project in downtown Portland using Harris hawks to haze these birds out of parks along the mall downtown because of concerns about whitewash. And, you know, there are some community concerns about that, but I will just tell you that there are other cities that have responded to crow roosts like this with pyrotechnics, with actually shooting birds, with propane cannons, also with cutting trees down altogether and using poisons like DRC 1337, or 1339. So this is actually a pretty cool phenomenon, relatively natural in its mechanisms, and they do demonstration flights during winter. So check it out this winter if you're in the Portland metropolitan area, and you know, root for the crows, of course, root for the crows, but go check it out. This is a study that was measuring corticosterone or stress hormones in birds that were nesting under various colors of LED lights, so red, green, and white lights. And what the researchers found was the highest level of stress hormone levels in birds that were nesting under white LEDs. And they subsequently found that those birds fledged fewer fledglings. It's not the only study that's looking at these kinds of light pollution impacts on fledgling success. So there was another study that put dim lights in nest boxes of great tits, and they found that those birds woke up earlier, they slept less, and they spent less time in their nest boxes than birds that didn't have artificial lights in their nest boxes. So implications for reproductive success in wild nesting birds. Let's talk about UV fluorescence. So UV glow has been known in plants since the 1840s. Don't ask me how they figured that out in the 1840s. But also in moths and spiders and fish and amphibians. It was discovered in opossums in the 1980s and also in owls in the 1980s. Nowadays, researchers in the field will commonly use UV lighting to age owl feathers in the field because newer feathers fluoresce more brightly than older flowers, and they fluoresce this bright magenta. So just in 2019, there were some researchers in Wisconsin that were looking at lichen in a forest with UV lighting, and they managed to just accidentally catch sight of a southern flying squirrel that fluoresce bright pink, almost magenta. So some researchers got together and they looked at 135 study skins of 3 New World nocturnal flying squirrels, and they all fluoresced. None of their diurnal squirrel counterparts show this kind of fluorescence. And nobody really knows why. There's no clear answer as to what ecological function this might be playing for them. But during twilight periods, the UV portion of the light spectrum is actually enhanced relative to other visible wavelengths. So the efficiency of this kind of signaling is actually boosted at twilight. Researchers have speculated that maybe flying squirrels are signaling each other. Maybe it's an anti-predator mimicry of owls that are in the same forest and are also fluorescing. Or maybe it's camouflage so that they blend in with the lichen on the trees in the forests that they are inhabiting. Pretty cool stuff. Much more research needs to be done on it. It's a really new discovery. But I love to know that things are out there glowing that we have no idea about, right? More on glowing in the wild world. So fungi reproduce by spore dispersal. They do that through their fruiting bodies, which is what we call mushrooms. And they do that passively through spreading spores on air currents, or squirrels or deer or some other forager come and nibbling on them, and then transferring those spores elsewhere, or humans walking through the forest collecting mushrooms, dropping spores. Some mushrooms have actually developed the ability to bioluminesce. It's called foxfire in mushrooms, and it's the oxidation of an enzyme called luciferin. It actually creates this very dim greenish glow that attracts insects. And research on this phenomenon has found that this is very closely tied to circadian rhythms. So it is a selective advantage, and we are potentially impacting it by the creation of light pollution out there on the landscape at night. Of 100,000 fungal species, really only about 75 are known to glow with foxfire. I was actually lucky enough to see this when I was in Costa Rica a couple years ago on the jungle floor, and it was incredible. It was absolutely incredible. So I recommend that folks try to find some foxfire out there in the nighttime landscape. Okay, so let's switch gears and talk a little bit about human health. So we humans have non-vision forming photoreceptor cells in our eyes. Not all of the cells in our eyes are actually forming images for us. When blue rich white light or daylight hits those cells, that triggers melatonin suppression in our systems, and it tells our brains that we want to wake up, that it's time to be alert, to get some work done. It's daytime. This is the kind of light that is emitted by our cell phones and our computers, and now increasingly by our streetlights. The thing is that our cell phones and our computers have settings by which that kind of blue rich white light is dialed down late in the evening so that you are taking less of that into your eyes. Streetlights generally don't have a corollary to this. There are tunable systems out there. Not many municipalities have actually installed them. This is why the American Medical Association came out with a report in 2016 recommending that cities and other municipalities that were installing LED lighting systems on their streets stay away from blue rich white lighting. So really choosing lighting that would minimize that blue emission. Portland, unfortunately, has already converted 45,000 of our streetlights to this kind of lighting. But I'll tell you now, and then we'll get the link to you again later. If you have light that's trespassing from a streetlight in front of your house in the city of Portland, you can request a back shield. And they will come out and evaluate to decide whether you actually have enough light trespass coming into your house to warrant a back shield. But your sleep is incredibly, incredibly critical to your health. So I highly recommend that you don't let this kind of thing be chronically impacting your sleep cycle. Some people need less sleep than others, but don't let some kind of external factor like this be something that's keeping you up at night. The American Medical Association has said that blue rich white light may increase risk of cancer, diabetes, and cardiovascular disease. So pretty significant health concerns. And the Center for Disease Control has said that insufficient sleep is linked to the development of type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and depression. So get your sleep. Don't let this kind of light be impacting your sleep patterns. Relatedly, this is an interesting study that came out of the Stanford Sleep Epidemiology Lab, looking at almost 16,000 people over the course of 8 years and interviewing them about their sleep habits. And researchers then overlaid that data with outdoor lighting data from the Defense Meteorological Satellite Program. And they discovered that people living in areas with higher outdoor night lighting levels reported delayed bedtime and delayed wake time, shorter sleep duration overall, an increase in daytime sleepiness, also reported a lower sleep quality, and in fact had a diagnostic profile that researchers call consistent with circadian rhythm disorder. So this is something that sleep epidemiologists are now diagnosing, circadian rhythm disorder. You really need your sleep. One thing that's really disturbing about this study is they found that these impacts showed up even if people went home and closed blackout curtains in their, whatever their sleeping quarters were. So exposure to this kind of light before bed and sleeping in fully dark conditions still resulted in these impacts to sleep quality and sleep duration in people. So quite sobering. Let's talk about climate change a little bit. In the age of climate change, are we meeting our climate change goals to reduce carbon emissions and reduce energy usage? Based on 2011 Department of Energy data, about 35% of light is wasted because it's unshielded or poorly aimed, so poorly designed. That results in $3 billion a year of energy loss and 15 million tons a year of CO2 emissions. The good news is that this is fixable. So if you can get that lighting redesigned or turned off, once it's off, light pollution doesn't leave residue like a lot of other pollutants do. So there are things that you can do for your home lighting. There are things that can be done about commercial lighting and even street lighting. The best practices are functionally the same. Minimize any unnecessary lighting. Make sure fixtures are fully shielded so that light is aimed only down. Limit the total brightness of the fixtures because light also bounces off of other surfaces and that glare can end up in the sky as well. And choose a warm color or a color temperature of under 3000 kelvins. You won't always see this rating system. You can see on the right-hand side of the screen, I have outlined in red color temperature and it's marked 3000 kelvins on these light bulbs that I bought. You won't always see that. But if you find someplace labeled on the box that says warm color temperature, you're good to go. This is for exterior lighting at night. If you're looking for light bulbs to put in your daytime office or maybe in your laundry room where you only do laundry during the day, you can go for cooler lighting. But for any kind of nighttime application or exterior application, you want to stay in the warm temperature zone. Also using adaptive controls, so motion sensors or dimmers. If you already have lighting installed and it doesn't have motion sensors or dimmers, you actually can buy a light bulb that has a motion sensor embedded right in the tip of the bulb. I use these for my front porch lighting. They're much brighter. It's 1,000 lumens. It's much brighter than I actually need them to be, but they're only on for about a minute when there's movement on the front porch. So it's only on for the amount of time it takes me to get my key in the door and get in the house, or it flicks on if somebody comes onto the front porch, which I kind of want to know about. So I highly recommend something like this, and they're relatively inexpensive. We always have to talk about safety and security because this is, of course, a consideration with night lighting. And there is this myth that we think that more lighting equals more safety. But the truth is the data just does not bear it out. More lighting does not necessarily equal more safety. What we need is better lighting. We need our lighting to be designed more thoughtfully. So I've included just a few studies here that have looked at the issue of lighting and safety. And I want to call your attention there to the right-hand column. There's a report that was prepared for Pacific Gas and Electric. And language directly from that report says, no link found between lighting and crime, or any link is too subtle or complex to have been evident in the studies undertaken to date. The next one down is the Chicago Alley Lighting Project, where researchers studied crime on specific alleyways in Chicago for 1 year. And then they went in and they installed additional streetlights and made the existing ones brighter in those alleyways. And then they subsequently did another year of post retrofit data collection. And they found an average increase of 21% in crime after the lighting was increased in frequency and brightness. So that really complicates the narrative, doesn't it, about more lighting equaling safer conditions. The last one there on the right is a report from the National Institute of Justice. And direct language from that report is street lighting an effective approach in the reduction and deterrence of crime? The answer is inconclusive. We have very little confidence that improved lighting prevents crime. So really, we just need to think about how we can design our lighting better instead of just dialing it up and expecting that to solve our crime issues. I also want to point out that a lot of our lighting in our cities at night is not actually in service to making our cities vibrant, making us feel safer, or making our cities beautiful. So a lot of our lighting in our cities at night is wasted on things like billboards, where that lighting is affixed to the bottom of the billboard and shines up over the billboard and right on up into the night sky. I also see so many parking lots that are absolutely empty in the middle of the night that are illuminated to their full levels as if there's some activity going on in that parking lot. Motion sensor lighting would be so much more effective in this case. That lighting could go off if police wanted some trigger to understand if there was occupancy in this parking lot, or if a building owner wanted to know that and they saw the lights on, they would know that some kind of activity had triggered them on. So something to think about. And then also when we think about making our cities really vibrant and having public art, this is brilliant. We want to have public art in our cities. But now we have two examples of different lighting strategies. The one on the right is Mother Earth at the corner of Southeast 9th and Division in Portland. That mural is lit from the top and the light is cast down. It's painted down over the mural and is actually illuminating the sidewalk beneath the mural as well. The photo on the left is the Fair Hair Dumbbell, where there's art on the sides of those buildings and they've illuminated them from the bottom of the walls of the building straight up into the sky. So two different strategies. One of them, I would say, is much more environmentally responsible and more effective than the other. Something else to think about. So the question that we're left asking is really, can we reimagine our approach to lighting? And can we have pleasant nighttime experiences in our cities while we are also reducing light pollution? And I think the answer is yes. There are plenty of good examples. These are photos from Dallas, Texas, Amsterdam, New York City, and they're all really nice ambient lighting that creates a beautiful sense of place, that provides for safe circulation for anybody who's a pedestrian in this area and isn't throwing a lot of unnecessary light up into the sky. It's also not producing glare that temporarily blinds you when you then walk into a darkened area adjacent to these massive pools of light. So this is much more even lighting, which is a better idea in terms of a safety standpoint. Also much better for going on a date, right? So if any of this is of interest to you and you want to get involved, if you're in Portland, I would strongly encourage you to participate in our Lights Out launch on September 19th, coming up really soon. It launches a month-long event where we will be broadcasting information that we get from the CSU Aero Eco Lab about high-volume bird movements over the city. And we'll be asking people to extinguish their unnecessary lighting overnight. It doesn't impact safety and security lighting, so if you need your front porch light on, go ahead and leave it on. But any lighting that you can get turned off or pulling your shades, we definitely want folks to do that. We are also in the process of adopting a dark skies strategy for Portland. There is a hearing before City Council about that on the 17th of this month. It's not a public hearing, unfortunately, but you can submit comments to the city in support of these strategies, and I would encourage you to do that. We'll get a link to you in the chat box about how you can do that. If you're in the city of Portland and you have a street light that's trespassing into your home, request a shield. Here's the link. We'll also put that in the chat box. We also have a program called Take the Pledge to Go Lights Out, where we ask people to do a very simple audit of their home lighting, look for opportunities to improve it, make sure it's well shielded. We'll send you a free yard sign or vinyl window cling to help you raise awareness with your neighbors about this program and about the importance of controlling light pollution. I would also really encourage folks in cities to get outside the city, see the stars. You know, you can also attend a star party. These days, star parties are generally virtual, and a lot of places are doing them, and that's certainly a cool way to participate. There is also no substitute for the real thing. Get outside, get under a beautiful dome of the night sky, and remember how incredibly small and inconsequential you are, right? This is an important part of the human experience, to remember that we are tiny in the cosmos. If you are elsewhere in Oregon, I would encourage you to avail yourselves of a lot of information that's out there. Astrotourism is gaining huge popularity, I think, around the world, but definitely in the state of Oregon, especially because we have such incredible night skies in southeastern Oregon. If you remember the Bortle scale over there in those class 1 dark skies, the Alvord Desert, Steens Mountains, Summer Lake, these are all places where you can go and behold an incredible night sky. The International Dark Sky Association now has a chapter that's operating in Oregon. I'm on the board of that chapter, and there's some pretty cool stuff happening there. Some of my fellow board members have implemented a sky quality monitoring program in Central Oregon, and they're looking to expand that outside of Central Oregon. We are also developing a Good Neighbor lighting program where you can enroll in a program to help get you and your neighbors all to make sure that your lighting at home is responsible and thinking about impacts to others. There's also a program to designate international dark sky places in the state. Some other members of the IDA Oregon board that I work with have successfully helped get that designation in Sun River recently, but there are certainly other candidates in Oregon. So looking at that kind of programming. The Basin and Range Dark Sky Cooperative has historically been operating just in the Great Basin in Nevada, and they are expanding to help work in Oregon and get folks networking and really talking about how we can preserve dark skies in this state. There's also a group of folks called the Oregon Outback Dark Sky Network operating in Lake County, looking at international dark sky place designations down there. And then I just want to give a plug for Oregon Star Safari. This is a company that's operating out of French Glen, Oregon. They'll take you out on Steens Mountain to do some stargazing that will blow your mind. So we'll get links to some of these things in the chat box. Of course, join Portland Audubon. Audubon is working statewide to preserve night skies and raise awareness about this issue. And with that, I will take questions if folks have them. Here's my email address that will also pop up in the chat box.
Great, thank you. We have many questions, and lots of different aspects of what you've talked about this evening. I'm going to start with a couple questions about the earlier part of your talk in the effect that these lights have on animals, mammals and insects and whatnot. I had a question about you were saying that there was some testing on cortisol levels. I think you said in birds specifically. Was it an effect of the light directly? For example, was it anxiety caused due to awareness that they were more vulnerable to predators, or was it other variables that resulted in the increased cortisol?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And I would have to say that that would be a question for that researcher. I'm not exactly sure. I imagine that, yes, it's probably in part being more being more conspicuous to predators. Another thing is potentially just the wakefulness that's caused by those white lights, because that kind of light, as we talked about, is suppressing melatonin secretion and causing wakefulness. So that's probably creating stress in a bird that really needs to be doing some sleeping, right? And that higher stress hormone level was actually in birds under white lights, not so much under red lights or green lights. So it was definitely a function that was specific to that white lighting. And it probably had to do with wakefulness, but also, yes, feeling conspicuous.
There was a question about a local thing we have here in Portland, the Chapman swifts, which if you wouldn't mind describing what that is for the folks who are joining us from places outside of the Oregon or Portland area. But there was a question about, do the Chapman swifts have light issues, and how would they potentially act differently if there was less light?
Yeah, okay, so good question. So the Chapman swifts, these are Voxus swifts that occur on the West Coast, and they nest here in the Portland area. They also migrate through. They're up into BC, and they'll spend their winters all the way down in Venezuela. So we do have really big peak numbers that come through Portland, particularly in September. And that is quite a phenomenon. Sometimes you can go to Chapman Elementary School in the middle of September and find 4,000 to 5,000 people on the lawn with their families and their picnics, and they're enjoying the spectacle of these birds amassing over the school and then essentially creating what looks like a tornado cloud or a vortex and funneling right into that chimney where they will spend the night. They are chimney nesters, but this is just a roosting behavior, and they roost communally, in some cases later on in the season to help keep each other warm, but also because there's safety in numbers. And you know, some of them are going to have to get picked off, and they do. Often you see predators sitting on the top of that chimney, and they'll take a couple of birds. But that's why they're doing that, nesting communally there. They actually don't migrate at night. They migrate during the day. Light pollution could certainly impact them, but it would be in pretty different forms. And historically, their natural habitat would have been to nest in old growth snags, in hollow snags in old growth forest. And this is an example of a species that actually has adapted to the urban environment. And now they will use the interior rough surface of chimneys. So if you have a metal sleeve or chute inside your chimney, they can't use that. But if you just have brickwork, they can actually use that to hang onto the inside. So sure, there could be light pollution impacts to swifts, but it doesn't have to do with migration.
Yeah, the swifts are a pretty remarkable thing here at this time of year in Portland.
Yes, and I should mention, unfortunately, Swift Watch is closed this year. So the Chapman Hill is totally closed. Portland Public Schools really doesn't want you to go there. Portland Parks has asked people not to show up. Audubon has been helping get the word out that this is just not a good time, given COVID distancing requirements, for there to be huge crowds of people amassed on that hill.
Thank you for adding that. I didn't realize that, but I would encourage those of you who have not been there before, just Google Chapman swifts, or the folks who are in the chat rooms, or the chat and the comments. If you want to put a link in there, the pictures are really remarkable. So that's kind of a fun thing local here to Portland, and I'm sure other places as well. But so speaking of Portland, there's a question about has Portland or other Oregon cities or any other cities that you know of, have they created codes or guidelines for city lighting on buildings, especially during migration? You mentioned, I think, that one building in, I think it was Chicago, where they had so many strikes and then they turned the lights off. But is that codified anywhere?
That was Galveston. It is codified in some cities in the Portland metropolitan region and in some cities around the country, and certainly around the world. We don't currently have lighting code in the city of Portland, which is something that we're working on, that would really look to address some of these egregiously bad lighting situations, including on commercial buildings, including looking at ways that we can do a better job of lighting our billboards. But yes, there are several lighting codes in the Portland metropolitan region that range anywhere from one page, I think, in like Forest Grove, to 40 pages in Hillsborough. So in some cases, they're very detailed and very comprehensive. In other cases, they're relatively short and sweet. But yes, there are examples in the Portland metropolitan region.
I'm realizing that this question might be a little bit outside of your scope of knowledge, but I'm curious if I am fully on board with the idea of making our skies less light because it's good for humans, it's good for animals, but I recognize that there is a portion of the population that don't really care so much about that. They care more about the financial situation there. So are there any movements to try and say, well, hey, if you turn off your lights, your bills will be lower, or any kind of financial incentive for that?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely. And in the state of Oregon, Energy Trust of Oregon is really the body that provides those kinds of incentives. There are places where there's been modeling done with buildings that have decided to participate in a lights out program. Usually, yes, not just because of the birds and not just because of the night sky, but because there are cost savings that they can achieve if they do that. And they're staggering, the savings that can be achieved by turning off your overnight lighting. I mean, honestly, even if you drive around the Portland area, if you drive by Big Pink at midnight on a Saturday night, that thing is lit up from the inside like a torch, and there is nobody in there. I'm telling you, there aren't even cleaning crews. So there is a tremendous potential there for building owners to save a lot of money. Sometimes there's an upfront cost to putting in motion censored lighting, and that's where Energy Trust of Oregon comes in to help offset those costs and incentivize doing those kinds of things. Some of it is just getting people to change their behavior and turn off their lights. The other thing is that in a lot of cases, buildings really want to be identifiable and iconic in the night skyline. And so they're reluctant to turn off their architectural lighting for that reason. So we really have to just get to the point where we tip the scales, and buildings want so much to be participating in energy savings, saving of the night sky, and protection of birds that are migrating through our skies.
And I just saw a comment pop up in the chat. For those of you not in Portland, Big Pink is the nickname of a large, I think our tallest skyscraper here in Portland. So that's what she was talking about.
Yes,
that from
sorry.
context.
The U.S. Bancorp Tower.
So I want to talk a little bit more about what individuals can do in their own spaces. And I'm particularly interested in the light shield that you described. And I think you said if there's a light in front of your house that you can have them call out and find out if that can be shielded. I'm wondering, does it have to be on the front? Can it be on the side or behind your house? What are the parameters there?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I don't really have very good news about that. There was once upon a time when the Portland Bureau of Transportation would come out and affix a front side shield to a street light if the one you were complaining about was across the street from your home. They have since said that they are no longer providing front side shields. They will only provide a backside shield. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't actually call, because in some cases, when a street light is installed, that fixture head should be perpendicular to the pole, right? And in some cases, they haven't been tilted correctly. So if it's tilted up just a little bit, you might be experiencing more light trespass into your home across the street. What they can do then is come and level that better, or even overcompensate slightly and apply a back shield so that you aren't then putting your neighbor across the street out. Yeah. Side shields, I suspect they probably are not putting side shields on lights.
Yeah, there's just one to the side. We're on a corner, so on the side that would be good for us. But anyway, I digress.
I always encourage people, if you have light coming into your house, just make the report and let them decide whether or not they think you qualify.
Great, thanks.
I'll say one of the elements in the dark skies report that we are taking to City Council on the 17th is a full funding of this project. Right now, the streetlight shields are just a complaint-based process, and PBOT doesn't actually have money to be doing this. So one of the proposals is actually to provide funding for them to be able to expand the program. First matter, of course, is actually getting that program expanded into East County, because there are some equity issues about where the program has been implemented so far. And particularly in neighborhoods that have fewer trees, trees can provide a really nice natural buffer between your home and a streetlight. And so in neighborhoods that are more tree impoverished, that's more of an issue. So we definitely need to address some equity concerns about the program.
I'm also wondering if you talked about motion sensors, but let's say you wanted to have your front lights on your house until 10 p.m. and then they would shut off, or have them on a timer rather than on a motion sensor. One, is that a good idea? And two, if so, what time or how much time after sunset would you go for?
Yeah, I mean, this is a hotly debated question. A timer is a great idea. I mean, the thing you don't get with a timer that you do get with a motion sensor is the element of surprise. And so if your front lights are on for the sake of security, one of the best things you can do is have lights that are on a motion sensor, because then when somebody comes up to break into your house or steal something off your front porch, they're surprised to suddenly be in a flood of light. You don't get that with a timer situation. It's more predictable for anybody who's casing your house, if that's something of concern. Since a lot of birds that are migrating take off within about an hour after sunset, you actually do kind of want to try to get that lighting off earlier. If you're not going to have it turn off until midnight, you're probably not providing a huge benefit to birds, though the cumulative impact of a lot of people really doing these behavior changes will have an impact on the amount of light that ends up in the sky. I know that for sure people tend to think, what is my one little light doing? But if everybody thinks that, then we still just have a lot of light pollution. And if everybody thinks about how they can get their own home lighting under control, we're talking to commercial building owners, we're talking to the city about street light shielding, that kind of thing, we can all get together to help reduce the light pollution over our cities.
I think that there's also the impact of, if you do it, then your neighbors are noticing that you're doing it, and that might impact the people living around you as well. So that's an additional benefit.
Sure, absolutely. And then if you have a plaque or something in your front yard, people are curious then. And in many cases, people have no idea about the impacts of light pollution, especially like I talked about, if people are born in cities and live their whole lives in cities, they're just habituated to this amount of light pollution that we're subjected to every day.
So we're getting close to the end, but I do have just a couple more quick questions. What about holiday lights? Because I know we're coming up to the point where people are going to be putting out holiday lights, whether it's Halloween or winter solstice or whatever. Is that a problem or no?
Winter is long and coldish and dark and dreary in the Pacific Northwest. If you live in Southern California, I might say to you, hey, if you can curb your holiday lighting a little bit and it doesn't break your heart too much, then do it. Because actually even dim light at night is having impacts on our ecosystems. And in fact, I think somebody has modeled what happens with light from outer space during the holiday season, and there is actually a considerable uptick in lighting that can be detected. However, in the city of Portland, I'm really reluctant to tell people that in the dead of winter they can't put up some holiday lighting, right? It's so important for our spirits to get some of this festive lighting out. So, I would say don't go Peacock Lane. For people who aren't in the Portland area, Peacock Lane is this one street in Portland where people, put lights all over their houses, and it's really pretty striking, but it's creating a lot of light pollution. So don't go Peacock Lane, but put up a few lights if it brightens your deep, dark winter months, and just, be kind of thoughtful about it. But it does have an impact. It does have a cumulative impact, I'm sorry to say.
Would having colored lights or incandescent bulbs, I want to ask another question about incandescent bulbs, but not the blue LED light strings, would that help?
They're going to be better. Absolutely. Yes. Incandescent lighting is much better. It doesn't produce as much of that blue rich white light that scatters in the atmosphere. So yes.
So yeah, I want to ask another question about the incandescent lights, because we've got a whole thing going on in the chat about,
Okay.
LEDs, and incandescent lights are so much worse for energy consumption, but they may also be good for, there's a balance there. But there's also LEDs that are at different frequencies that might be better. Any kind of last thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, most of the incandescent lighting that you are likely to find is not going to be that energy efficient, at least not compared to LEDs in general. I think that there are some companies out there that are working on the production of better incandescent lighting, and it is certainly better in terms of light pollution. When we're talking about LEDs, absolutely make sure that you're selecting warm bulbs and selecting bulbs that are rated as 3000 kelvins and below, and even below that if you can. 2200 kelvins is great. If you go to the Big Island of Hawaii, where they have a world-class observatory, their street lighting on that island is 2200 Kelvin lighting. To keep it really yellow, it doesn't impact the astronomical efforts going on that island the way that 4000 Kelvin, 5000 Kelvin LEDs do. So look for better efficacy out of incandescents in the future. I'm not sure we're quite there yet, and I don't know if we'll ever be right to the exact efficacy. I'm also not a lighting engineer, so I'm not up on the technology as it comes out every day. And a lot of this technology, it's developing while we're having this conversation, right? It's leaps and bounds. It's happening so rapidly. So I'm not up on absolutely everything, but definitely keep your eyes open for more products and research coming out about it.
Great. Well, thank you, Mary Coolidge. And I want to remind you, the folks who are watching on Zoom, that she's going to stick around for a few more minutes afterward and answer some of the questions that have been coming up in the chat. Obviously, we couldn't get to all of them. And she may not be able to get to all of them either, but there's a little bit more opportunity to ask questions. Also, she had her email address up on that last slide, which I think our folks they put in the chat and the comments. You're welcome to get in touch with her at Portland Audubon if you have more questions about specific things and that weren't answered here this evening. So I invite you to do that. I am going to share my screen one more time. And whoops. Okay, and I'm going to finish up tonight's event by telling you about next week's event. And Thursday, September 10, we will be talking about anti-vaxxers, how to challenge a misinformed movement. Kind of a wide difference in what we were talking about here this evening, but we hope that you will join us and hear Dr. Jonathan Berman, who is an author, a professor, and also one of the co-founders of the March for Science in 2017, for any of you who participated in that. Also want to mention, many of you are here because you like birds, and we have another bird talk coming up on Thursday, September 24. We have Wenfei Tong, who is a biologist and author, and she's going to be talking about her book, Understanding Bird Behavior, an illustrated guide to what birds do and why. And it should be a fun talk. It's a beautiful book, and yeah, join us back here on the 24th for that. Quick mention to thank all of our Patreon supporters. The numbers of Patreon supporters keeps going up every week. It's fabulous. Thank you so much for your support. And that is one way that you can continue to help us create these events and our podcasts to keep bringing science to people, so like yourselves. So thank you, those of you who are able to join us in that way. And also, if you are interested, if you'd like to join us on Patreon, there's a link there. Or if you want to make a one-time donation of any amount really at all, you can donate through our nonprofit partner, which is makeyouthink.org/support. There's some links there, and we would be most grateful for that. So I appreciate your time and your attention. And I'm going to go off screen again, and I'm going to welcome Mary to come back and go in the chat and answer some more questions for the folks on Zoom. And if you're on Facebook, I think we'll leave it on, but she won't be able to see your comments. So anyway, thank you for coming. Welcome back, Mary.
Okay, I see somebody telling me that people look at their lights out Portland sign on their fence. That's fantastic. I love it. I don't know if folks can actually see the chat box, so I'm just reading. It looks like there is some information on blue-orange LEDs. Somebody else, okay, so Dirk must be a lighting engineer because there's somebody in here who's talking about a company called Sora or SORAA that produces a line of lights that emits 415 nanometers rather than 452, which is better and doesn't trigger suppression in the sleep cycle. I have no idea if those are commercially available or if they're available retail. Tucson has lighting restrictions. Yes, so there's a comment that Tucson, Arizona has lighting restrictions primarily triggered by their astronomical observatory. Yes, I have many times wished that we had more of a local observatory here in Portland. I mean, there's one in Goldendale, Washington, and in fact, you can see the lights of Portland from Goldendale, so we are impacting their observation abilities. And then there's Pine Mountain Observatory, but that's outside of Bend, so not so much of an issue in Portland. What kind of light bulb should we use right now then? This is complicated. Yeah, I would say if you're looking for light bulbs for exterior lighting on your house, LEDs are just fine. LEDs are fine in any case, inside or outside. This is from Chris Rod. I don't think I'm seeing your entire last name, Chris. But for exterior applications or anything where you're going to be exposed to this light at night, just make sure that when you're choosing an LED, that you're choosing something really warm. So now when you go into Home Depot or Lowe's, you can actually stand at the light bulb display, and they oftentimes have little demonstration light bulbs, and you can press the button. Some of them are really cold light, almost blue. Some of them are really warm, much more yellow. For any exterior application or for a nighttime application in your house, say your bedside table, go for a warm light. If it's for your office and you're only going to be in your office until early evening at the latest, or if it's for something like your laundry room and you're really only going to be there during the day, then you can choose a much colder light. In fact, we have in our kitchen a light that not only dims, but is also tunable. And it's a nice flat LED on the ceiling. And so when we dim it down, it becomes much yellower, but then you can dial it all the way up and it's like a surgery center in there. And it's pretty cold light. And we just don't do that at night. We don't dial it all the way up. Some comments on the Swift Hill. Somebody's mentioning Swifts in Oregon City. Yes, there are Swifts in Oregon City. So, you know, it doesn't draw quite as much of a crowd to 7th and Main. And you still get a pretty cool bird show. It is also a place where you can probably do a better job of staying distanced from people than you can on the Swift Hill. Still, you know, we are operating under COVID restrictions. So we are technically not encouraging anybody to gather up for events like this. More on Chapman. Okay, so apparently MIT is doing some research on new incandescent light bulbs. That's great. You're fine with LEDs that are warm though, and they're very energy efficient. So No more frosted lights being made. I'm not sure what this is about. I see a bunch of links. Should we use it only incandescent light bulbs? Yeah, I think you're gonna have a really hard time finding them. I will say that while you cannot find LED, non-LED holiday lights at places like Fred Meyer or wherever you go, whatever store you go to buy holiday lighting. If you get online, I think there's a place called thousandbulbs.com or something, and you can in fact find incandescent light bulbs there if you're interested in doing that. Lots of comments. Parking lot lighting comments. Yes, they drive us crazy. Yes, there was a study in Spain that looked at prostate cancer rates and breast cancer rates in municipalities that had LEDs. So yes, definitely human health concerns. There's one also that's from the United States looking at thousands of nurses over the course of many years. They just chose nurses because it was a population they could access, and found higher breast cancer rates in people that lived in areas that had higher outdoor lighting in areas where they lived. Back to the cortisol levels. So I think maybe we have exhausted the comments. Yes, somebody from Rose City Astronomers posted a link here to Rose City Astronomers. I hope I mentioned them in my talk. I meant to. And yes, there is a recording that will be on the Science on Tap YouTube site, and the old shows are just there, available for anybody to go watch.
And Mary, I'm going to jump in real quick. If you scroll down to the very bottom, I think there are a couple of new questions.
Oh, okay.
If you want to take those. And yes, the video should be available hopefully tomorrow or Saturday.
Something about a question about satellites. I'm distracted. Astronomers are unhappy. I think there is some study on satellite activities, but it's not anything that I've read yet. I don't know if it's published, so I can't speak to that at this point, but I imagine we'll probably see some research coming out on that in the near future. Okay, that might be it. One new message. I guess I can't see something about the questions, but anyway, thank you all so much for joining up. And again, if you have questions and you want to follow up with me, I am easily found on the Portland Audubon website, Coolidge, M as in Mary, COOLIDGE at audubonportland.org. Feel free to drop me an email. I can provide any additional information that folks are looking for.
Thank you, Mary, and everyone have a great evening. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, keep doing science.